We are here together to talk about the risks to our New England coastal communities from the climate changes that are coming our way. Despite really dirty efforts of the fossil fuel industry to keep the truth at bay, the tide of public understanding is turning. A recent survey by Yale and George Mason universities found that 73% of Americans now see global warming happening. That number is up 10 percentage points since 2015. Similarly, the percentage of Americans who consider global warming an important issue rose from 63% to 72% in the past 10 years. And in just the past year, the number of Americans who say they are worried about global warming jumped from 61 to 69%. One author of this research explained the results to the New York Times this way: people are beginning to understand that climate change is here in the United States, here in my state, in my community, affecting the people and places I care about, and now. This isn't happening in 50 years, 100 years from now, end quote. Dr. Katharine Hayhoe of Texas Tech University echoed these sentiments, saying, today, nearly everyone can point to a way that they are personally witnessing and are being personally affected by the impacts of a changing climate in the places where they live, end quote. Perhaps nowhere is this more true, Madam President, than along our coasts, where man-made climate change is already flooding towns, driving fisheries away from traditional fishing grounds, and bringing ashore stronger storms riding on higher seas. Last Tuesday, I picked up my home state paper, the Providence Journal, and I saw this headline splashed across the front page. It says, climate change, washed away, home values lost to rising sea levels. This is a study that I have mentioned here before, done by the First Street Foundation and researchers at Columbia University, that looks at what escalating flood risk is doing to coastal housing markets. That study started in Florida, peer-reviewed work in Florida, and they took that methodology and they've been working their way up the Gulf Coast and up the New England coast since then. They just reached my state and Senator Hassan's state, Massachusetts, and the report is not pleasant. They found that Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island lost a total of $403 million in expected property value between 2005 and 2017 due to increased tidal flooding risks. Just between 2005 and 2017, Rhode Island coastal properties lost nearly $45 million in expected value. The study called out these particular properties here in Warren, Rhode Island, that lost over a third of their value during that time frame. Rhode Islanders here in the town of Warwick lost over $4 million in home values due to the threat of climate change-driven sea level rise. Now, several studies warned how climate change will affect coastal property values. This First Street Foundation study is the first to demonstrate value loss that has already occurred, as the study itself says. A Columbia University researcher who worked on the First Street study said this: each time we analyze a new state, we see the same phenomenon. Increased tidal flooding leads to a loss in home value appreciation. As sea level rise accelerates, we expect the corresponding loss in relative home value to accelerate as well. Madam President, that hits home indeed. The latest scientific evidence shows sea levels rising at a faster pace than expected. NOAA data shows that Greenland lost around 280 billion tons of ice per year from 2002 to 2016. A National Geographic article covering this study noted that the Greenland ice sheet is 10,000 feet thick in places and contains enough ice to raise sea levels 23 feet. Another study shows that the Antarctic ice sheet has lost around 252 billion tons of ice per year over the last 10 years. Again, according to National Geographic, full melting of the Antarctic ice sheet could mean nearly 187 feet of sea level rise. In Rhode Island, our Coastal Resources Management Council has been a longtime leader in modeling flooding and sea level risks for Rhode Island's coastal businesses, communities, and decision makers. Earlier this month, CRMC partnered with the University of Rhode Island to release a series of highly detailed risk maps for several coastal Rhode Island towns. These maps provide a damage assessment down to individual structures due to flooding and storm waves. For homes and businesses and critical infrastructure like the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is right there on the coast of Warren, Rhode Island, the facility will be almost totally wiped out. CRMC's maps turn these general risks facing our communities from a hazy sketch to a vivid, living color 3D picture. And that picture is grim for these coastal communities. Rhode Island officials are currently preparing for a worst-case scenario of more than 9 feet of sea level rise, overtaking our 400 miles of coastline by the end of the century. This map is from Rhode Island CRMC's interactive Storm Tools application, which overlays the sea level rise projections over our current topography. The blue, all through here, is currently land that is flooded when 10 feet of sea level rise come. And this extra little rim of green, some of the edges, is when you push it up to 12 feet. So as you see all the blue here, think of homes and businesses and properties that are owned by people that are going to literally disappear into the ocean if we don't pay attention. These are the homes and businesses of my constituents. A 2017 report from the real estate database company Zillow identified over 4,800 homes in Rhode Island, valued at nearly $3 billion, that would be underwater by 2100 using an optimistic estimate of only 6 feet of sea level rise. In this snapshot from Upper Narragansett Bay, you can see some of Rhode Island's larger coastal communities stranded as a scattered series of new islands, a Rhode Island archipelago. Today's map of Rhode Island, the map that we have known since our founding, will become unrecognizable as Warwick Neck here breaks off to become its own island. Newport, south of this map, splits, and Bristol, through here, comes apart. A recent report from Climate Central and Zillow looked at the new homes being built in risky coastal areas, ones expected to suffer from annual floods by 2050 under a moderate greenhouse gas emissions model. And they showed that Rhode Island has seen more growth in risk areas than in safe areas. So obviously, if emissions don't meet these moderate goals, things are going to get a good deal worse. and well before water actually overtakes your home, well before the water is coming through the front door, come the economic effects of rising oceans, and they will be big. In 2017, GAO reported that coastal areas face particularly high financial risks, and that annual coastal property losses from sea level rise and increased storms will run into the billions of dollars every year in the short run, and over $50 billion every year by late century. EPA has estimated $5 trillion in economic costs to coastal property from climate change through 2100. $5 trillion. And that is the Rhode Island part of that. The Union of Concerned Scientists reports that sea level rise will double the number of coastal communities facing what they call chronic inundations and possible retreat, meaning you're out of there, by 2035. The market is awakening to these risks. Moody's evaluates municipal bonds. It has begun evaluating the bonds of coastal communities with an eye to this flooding risk. Banks, mortgagers, insurance companies, appraisers are starting to incorporate these risks into their work for coastal properties. A recent issue of the Appraisal Institute's Valuation magazine quoted Rhode Island appraiser Brad Heavenor warning that homes that receive a 30-year mortgage this year, quote, might be completely different types of property by the end of their mortgage than they are today, end quote. Good luck getting a 30-year mortgage on a property that the bank believes will be, quote, completely different by the end of the mortgage. The coastal housing market is on the precipice of a dangerous financial cliff. First Street, Zillow, NOAA, GAO, EPA, Climate Central, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and others all make the same warning. Federal home mortgage giant Freddie Mac said it this way: the economic losses and social disruption may happen gradually, but they are likely to be greater in total than those experienced in the housing crisis and Great Recession. The editor of the insurance industry trade publication Risk and Insurance said this, I quote, continually rising seas will damage coastal, residential, and commercial property values to the point that property owners will flee those markets in droves, thus precipitating a mortgage value collapse that could equal or exceed the mortgage crisis that rocked the global economy in 2008. These are serious warnings, Madam President, and they're deadly serious warnings for our coastal states. But here in Congress, these warnings fall on deaf ears, ears plugged deaf by the fossil fuel industry's persistent mischief. We have to get serious about our duty to our constituents. Polling shows that millions of Americans want us to face up to this threat, to safeguard their coastal property, and to curb the carbon pollution that is distorting our Earth's climate and raising our Earth's oceans. It is seriously time for us to wake up, Madam President. I yield the floor.